Hello friends, welcome back to the Homestead. We're back inside the kitchen. I know it's been a little while, but we are back in the kitchen because we've got to get some things in the pantry. So on one of my last videos in the collaboration that we did for what I will and won't can, I talked about some things that I would like to add in addition to my pantry items this year going forward. One of those items being beans. Now, I just canned up several different varieties of beans because I wanted to tweak the recipes to make sure that it was something that our family liked before I shared them with you. And the way I come up with these recipes was I just hopped on Pinterest. I wrote down about 4 different recipes that I found, and then I kind of made my own from the ingredients and the amounts that they used. We tried it. I had to tweak it a little bit. So here we are, and I'm bringing the recipe to you. So what we are putting up today are baked beans. So I followed the recipes that I found, and most were done in pints. So I tried it out to see if the amounts that I had written down were going to equal out to a certain number of pints. Now with this recipe that I have written down, I'll show you guys in just a minute, it came out to be 8 pints, which is perfect because I also want to do these in quarts. Now that would make 4 quarts if you were doing the recipe to make 8 pints. But for this recipe that I'm going to be doing with you today, we're actually going to double it because I want to make about 7 to 8 quarts. And go ahead and get some quarts on the pantry shelves because of the holidays that'll soon be coming up. We will be ready for the summer activities with quarts on the shelf to be able to share with friends and family. So I've put my recipe here in my recipe book, and everything that I share with you guys goes in the book because of course I wouldn't be sharing it with you if it wasn't one of our favorites. So here is the recipe. I will show you real quick what's on it. I'll also type it up down below. Okay, so the original recipe that I made in the pint jars, it called for 1/3 cup of molasses and 1/3 cup of brown sugar. I have since increased that to 1/2 cup for just the 8 pint recipe. And after trying them, they do taste like plain Jane Bush's baked beans. More so, I got the flavor from the Showboat pork and beans. That's kind of the flavor that I really got from it, was more so the Showboat brand pork and beans rather than the strong Southern Bush's recipe. So I'm hoping that increasing this amount by just a little bit is going to enhance the sweet, smoky flavor. At the bottom of that recipe, you also saw where I wrote down some options that I was going to try, and then once I made it, I decided to go ahead and leave it as is. But I did add 1 tablespoon of liquid smoke to it, which I think really helped. And I also may go ahead and double that for the regular recipe. So instead of using 1 tablespoon, I'm going to add a regular 2 tablespoons to the 8 pint recipe. So whenever we do the 4 or the 8 quarts that we're going to do today, it's actually going to be 4 tablespoons of liquid smoke. So to get started, we have already soaked our beans overnight. Alright, I've got them sitting here. Now what I did is I used, in the pints, I used pinto beans. Now the type of bean and the size of the bean is going to determine the amount that it's actually going to make. So with making the pinto beans, I had come out with, let's see, I used 2 pounds of beans and I soaked them overnight, which made the 8 pints. Alright, so what I've got here is actually about, since I'm doing 8 quarts, 4 pounds I'm going to need for the doubled recipe that we're going to be doing. So these soaked overnight, and the way you do that is you just measure out your amount of beans, put them in a bowl, which I like to put a colander inside my bowl, and then that way as they're done, I just lift the colander out, they drain, boom, you're done. So all this has to do is soak in cool water 8 to 12 hours or overnight. You can start this in the morning and then mid-afternoon go ahead and do the rest of the recipe You just have to allow for your time restrictions for the next step. But we've got our beans soaked overnight, got them drained out, and so now these are ready to go in our crock pot. Okay, so I've got my 7-quart crock pot out. This is just a hair bigger than the normal 6-quart. And so what we are going to do, I'm going to first mix all of the ingredients for my sauce base in here, and then I will put the beans in. And I'm actually going to turn this on high for 2 to 3 hours. And if you have time in the afternoon that you want to run it a full 4 hours on low, like 4 to 5 hours, that'll be fine. Now understand, after you've soaked them and you've cooked them in the crock pot, they are still going to be mildly hard. This is not a process to cook them. This is basically kind of a pre-absorption of the flavors from the sauce. And then once it goes into the pressure canner and you finish pressure canning the beans, then that's when the magic occurs. So don't worry about this being a too much cooked process. This is just a slow simmer of the sauces and the beans for the flavors to kind of marry before they go into the pressure canner. The salt and all of the sugar that is going into the sauce is a preservation. After you have actually soaked the beans and then get added to all of the sugars and the salt that we're putting in the sauce, it stops the cooking. It kind of protects and puts a barrier around the beans so they absorb the flavor but not cook. It's like a pre-soaking method. But once you pressure can it, then whenever it's being pressure canned, that's when it's going to push the liquid into the beans and they are going to finish cooking. These do not come out like mush at all. They have been fine. They've really been very, very good. And I know they'll be even better after I make these slight tweaks from the first recipe and do it in this second recipe. So we're going to take all of the ingredients for the sauce and go ahead and put them in the crock pot. If you want to go ahead and triple, quadruple this, you could go ahead and cook it in an oven roaster. You could half the ingredients and make just one batch. You'll have to just cook it longer to ensure that the beans are done if you're not planning on preserving these or pressure canning these to put them on your pantry shelf. So you can go ahead and just make just a half a batch of the recipe, just split it in half, and it'll make a great side dish for any cookout. So let's go ahead and get everything together.
My appetite, don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, well, I don't wanna jinx it, baby, and twist myself at the spine. Don't wanna overthink it, baby. It's just twist your body. Baby, you give me ice and fire.
So we set the timer on high. I'm gonna go ahead and cook these for 4 hours on high. Remember, this is not to cook the beans. This is to marry those flavors together. So I just set the lid on here loosely. We're gonna let it cook on high for 4 hours, and I'm gonna stir it occasionally just to make sure that the stuff on the bottom is not burning or anything like that, which I'm not worried about. It has never done that before, but I just want to keep everything stirred up and dissolved and marrying together so these beans get the best flavor. Alright, so here is the beans after we have had them in the crock pot for 4 hours on high. Don't worry about the way they look at the moment, because after we pressure can them, that's when they are going to turn that rich brown color. So with canning hot liquids, you want to make sure that your jars are warm. Go ahead, clean and sterilize them. And then all we're going to do is take our funnel, and what we want to do first is to fill each jar up. Since we're trying to get 8 quarts, we want to fill each jar up about halfway first, and then go back and top them off with liquid.
Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me high and dry.
Alright, so we got 7 quarts out of this one. So what we now need to do is fill them with equal amounts of liquid. So let's start with 1 scoop of our canning spoon, and we're just going to put 1 scoop in each, and then however we need to top them off, then we will just add a chicken broth or water, whatever we need to go ahead and top them off. Alright, go through and make sure you wipe the top of your jar rims off, just in case any of the sugar or broth or any beans or anything got on it, so that way you get a secure seal. Once you got those wiped off, then we're going to use our canning lids, new fresh canning lids on each one. These are the Ball Sure Tights. They do not have to be warmed up because it actually does decrease the integrity of the wax on the lid. So just make sure that you are using them room temperature. And then we're going to secure our rings onto our jars. And this will just be finger tight. Don't crank it down, because if you take it and crank it down, it can warp your lid, because there has to be a little bit of airflow underneath your lids, and that creates that suction as it cools off. So don't crank them down too tight or they will warp your lids. Now over here we need to get our pressure canner ready, and make sure that there is a rack in the bottom, because your jars cannot touch the bottom of your pressure canner or it will cause them to break. I also put a gallon of water in the bottom. Make sure you read your manufacturer's directions on using your pressure canner. This is a 16 quart Presto, and it just has the weighted pressure. It does not have the gauge on it. I put a gallon of water in there just because that's how I was raised using it. And then we're going to place all of our jars inside and go ahead and get it up to temperature. At this portion, you want to go ahead and make sure that you check all of your gaskets. Make sure your vent here is open. Make sure this is secure. Make sure your seal does not have any cracks in it and everything is open and functional. Follow your arrows to get your top secure, and then lock it down. Now for this recipe at my elevation, we are using 10 pounds of pressure. Now you're going to see a lot on YouTube and sometimes in the manufacturer's directions that it will tell you to vent this a steady stream for 10 minutes and then put the weight on. I've never done that, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the weight on here, and as soon as it starts jiggling, that's when I'm going to turn the temperature down. But you can do your own research and follow your guidelines. The first phase is for this valve to pop up. The next step of the process is for that to start jiggling. Here we go. This is where you would normally leave this off and let it vent for 10 minutes. But I go ahead and start my timer as soon as I turn the temperature down on my stove. Okay, so I get it to doing the hula dance. And then I turn my stove down to about medium high. Now you want to gauge your own stove and see where your sweet spot is for your temperature. If you have a gauge on your pressure canner, this is where you want to get it to about 11 pounds. One of the biggest mistakes people make whenever they blow up a pressure canner is when they don't turn their thermostat down. You've got to turn it down and keep a slight hula dance going on. And you hear it, it's very quiet. It's not very loud at all. It only has to move about 3 or 4 times a minute to be at the pressure if you're going by listening. Now that's how I've always canned. I've always canned by listening and watching. See, it stopped, so I need to turn it back up just a little bit, get it to rocking, and then I'll find that sweet spot. Because each of my eyes on my stove is different. One I have to do on medium high, the other one I have to do between medium high and high. Just because this is an 70s stove and the eyes are kind of tired of cooking. I'm so glad you like it. So all I do is just play with the temperature, turning it down until I get it to where I like the nice little slow jiggle. And that's where we leave it. Now for quarts, we're going to do 90 minutes and pints are 75. Even if you put meat in your baked beans, you can add meat, bacon, ham, whatever, barbecue, if you want, to your baked beans, and you'll still do it for 90 for quarts and 75 for pints. Okay, that looks good where it's at. We'll see you back when it's done. Now when it's done, I do like to remove it off the eye just a little bit. Very carefully. And then it will naturally depressurize. Probably for the next 10 to 15 minutes. And then we can open it up in just a little bit after this little button back here goes down. Then I can show you what they look like. Alright, let's open it up together and see what they look like. Okay, this is down. There's no steam coming out. Now at this point, since they are still hot, they're not going to be sealed. But let's take one out and look at it. Nice. You see how dark they are? Good morning, guys. Welcome back. Didn't even know you was gone, did you? So I have last night, after the pressure canner went ahead and naturally vented, came down off of pressure to down to 0. Like I showed you a while ago, just a second there, you just saw it, where I pulled one out, showed you what they look like. Well, right before bedtime, that was probably 2 or 3 hours. I let it sit there to cool off right before bedtime. I went ahead and took the jars out, set them on a towel on the counter, and covered them with a towel. Now, one of the things with canning, you don't want to drastically change the temperature because that can cause some issues with sealing, and it can even cause your jars to crack sometimes. So just be careful with drastic temperature changes, as in going from the hot pressure canner out to a cooler environment. Just be careful doing that. So that's what we want to do is, if you do take it out, Go ahead and cover it with a towel, as you see here. Cover it with a towel and leave about an inch space between your jars because you don't want them to hit because they're very fragile when they're hot. Leave about an inch space so it can get some airflow. Put a towel over it. That way it cools down a lot slower. Or you can just leave it in the canner until the next day and take them out, whichever you want to do. I have done both and both are just fine. So I wanted to show you real quick what these look like. Alright, so I've got one here, and you can see it darkened up like the normal color that you're used to seeing baked beans. One thing I'll point out is the liquid content. It's not very thick and saucy, so whenever you take this out, you might want to cook it just a little bit longer to reduce the liquid, or they'll be just fine as is. Some people like a thick sauce, and some people just like flavored beans. So totally up to you. So anyways, guys, I'm happy with the result. We are loving the flavor. We actually do. We like it a lot better. It tastes a lot like Bush's baked beans. And you can, like I said, you can go ahead and add some ham or bacon or some kind of meat of your choice into the beans. If you want to leave it out until later, that's fine too. It's all up to you. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. We are putting these baked beans in our pantry shelves, and I will be bringing you more recipes on new things to come as the garden brings them. So stick around for that. We'll see you later. Bye, guys.
Oh.